I stood outside my parents' house on a cold October evening 7 years ago, phone in hand, recording what they called my living funeral. Not the kind where you're grieving, the kind where your family celebrates your existence while wishing it had never begun. They threw a party for my 30th birthday. Called it a farewell to my future. The invitations featured my photograph on a mock gravestone. My younger sister, Michelle, designed them herself. Let me paint you a picture of my family first. My parents, David and Patricia, spent 3 decades holding me up against Michelle. She's younger by 3 years, graduated from a decent university, landed an entry-level corporate position, and suddenly became the child who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I chose a different road. I left community college after a year, juggling 3 jobs and unable to balance everything. My 20s were spent in construction, picking up technology contracts where available, teaching myself coding after dark. Dad called it squandering my abilities. Mom said I embarrassed the family name. By 30, I was living in a modest apartment downtown, freelancing, unmarried, still working hard. They saw failure. I saw something else entirely. The celebration happened at their place. A comfortable 3-bedroom home in a neighborhood that had gentrified over the years. I wasn't actually invited to my own mock funeral. A cousin mentioned it, assuming I knew, asking if I approved of the theme. I drove over that evening, parked up the block, and approached the house. Music and laughter drifted from inside. I positioned myself at the living room window. About 30 guests filled the space. Relatives, family friends, some of my parents' colleagues, even Michelle's boyfriend. They held drinks, laughing, enjoying themselves. On the mantel sat an enlarged photograph of me from high school, captioned with birth and death years as though I had actually passed. David stood to make a toast. I watched through that window, already recording because instinct told me I'd need evidence later. He raised his glass and announced it had been 30 years since they made their greatest error. Said it plainly, grinning like it was brilliant comedy. People laughed. Patricia clinked her glass against his and added she wished she'd terminated the pregnancy when she could. Now they were burdened with a 30-year-old disappointment. More laughter. Actual cheering. Then Michelle stood, my younger sister in a black dress, playing the part. She went on about how I'd never held a real position, never been in a relationship, just a pathetic waste who humiliated the family. She said she tells acquaintances I don't exist because explaining me is too difficult. The room erupted in approval. I recorded 12 minutes of this. Watched my own family and people who'd known me since childhood celebrate my worthlessness. My Aunt Rachel was there, laughing. My uncles on both sides, family friends who used to give me holiday gifts, all finding it hilarious. I didn't storm in, didn't make a scene. I returned to my car, sat there replaying that footage repeatedly, then drove home, fixed dinner, watched some videos, went to sleep. Here's what none of them knew. What I'm telling for the first time now. For 7 years before that party, since I was 23, I'd been building something they couldn't comprehend even if I explained it. That dropout disappointment who embarrassed them was already 3 years into a very specific project when they threw that celebration. The construction work, the technology contracts, the freelancing, all of it fed into something larger. Something I'd planned since overhearing Dad tell someone at a barbecue that having me was his worst financial decision. At 23, I started studying property investment, real estate law, mortgage systems, legal structures. Taught myself everything. Spent money on courses, certifications, consultations with attorneys about establishing business entities. Every spare dollar from those 3 jobs went toward this. While they compared me to Michelle in her corporate position, I was building a network in real estate, learning how property transfers work, how mortgages can be bought and sold, how someone can end up owning something without the original owners. Realizing until it's too late, my parents refinanced their house 4 times between 2016 and 2023. Each time they struggled, financially needed cash, made poor choices. Each time the bank sold their mortgage to investors, and each time I ensured I knew who was buying, where it was going, and how I could get closer. By 2021, I'd established an investment company, small, legal, legitimate. Started purchasing small mortgage notes, learning the system from inside. In 2023, their mortgage was sold again. They were struggling, behind on payments, facing loss. And my company ended up with the note they never knew. The paperwork went through a management company I contracted. All official, all legal, all proper. I now held the debt on the house they'd lived in for 30 years. The house where they'd celebrated what a disappointment I was. But I didn't act on that information yet. Just held it. Kept making payments to keep everything current. Kept building my business, kept working contracts, stayed quiet, stayed patient. Let them think I was still that failure in a small apartment with no prospects. Michelle kept posting on social media about family dinners I wasn't invited to. Holidays where they discussed how glad they were I didn't attend and ruined things. Last month, everything changed. I'd spent years expanding, building capital, making connections. My investment company was doing well. Not millions, but solid, legitimate, profitable. And I'd been waiting for the right moment to let them know exactly who owned their house. That moment came 3 weeks ago on a Monday. Dad called, first time in over a year. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. He needed money. Emergency plumbing issues, foundation problems. The house required major repairs they couldn't afford. He asked for $15,000, said it casually, but I heard the desperation underneath. I told him I'd consider it and call back. Hung up and sat there for an hour thinking about that funeral party, about standing outside in the cold, watching them toast to my worthlessness. Then I made calls to the management company handling their mortgage. Started the process I'd been planning for years. They were already 3 months behind on payments because I'd stopped covering them remotely through the management company. I'd been supporting them without their knowledge since buying the note, but I stopped in January. Let them fall behind. Let the notices accumulate. Let them panic. Now they faced foreclosure proceedings. They had no idea their failure son was the one who could make it all disappear, or make it infinitely worse. I called Dad 2 days later. Told him I couldn't loan the money, but knew someone who might help with their mortgage situation. Gave him the management company number. He didn't recognize it. Didn't make the connection, just thanked me. Said maybe I wasn't completely useless after all. I didn't respond. Last week, Mom called crying, asking if I'd heard from Dad, saying they were in serious trouble. The bank was threatening foreclosure. They might have to declare bankruptcy, might lose everything. She asked if I knew anyone who could help, if any of my contacts from technology work understood this area. I told her I'd make calls and hung up. Fixed dinner, watched the funeral party video again for probably the 100th time, and drafted an email to the management company with specific instructions about the next phase. Yesterday morning, they received a certified letter from my investment company, informing them their mortgage was in default, and foreclosure would begin in 30 days unless the full balance was paid. The letter included the company name that owned their note. My company, my name on the paperwork. Everything spelled out clearly. My phone exploded. 247 missed calls when I finally checked last night. Voicemails from both parents, from Michelle, from relatives, from family friends. Dad's voice on those recordings was something I'd never heard before. Actual sobbing, begging me to answer, pleading for me to stop this. Everything was ruined. The house was gone. Everything gone. Please, they were begging. Michelle left 16 voicemails calling me every name imaginable, saying I was destroying the family over hurt feelings, saying I was a monster making them homeless over a stupid party 7 years ago. Mom's messages alternated between begging and accusing, saying I can't do this to my own parents. What kind of person holds a grudge like this? She'd never forgive me if I went through with this. I haven't called anyone back yet. I'm sitting here in my apartment, the same one they mocked, looking at my laptop with copies of all the legal documents showing exactly how I built this situation over 7 years. How every decision, every dollar saved, every skill learned was aimed at this specific outcome. They wanted to throw me a funeral. Said I was their greatest mistake. Said they wished they'd aborted me. Celebrated my worthlessness in front of 30 people while I stood outside recording it all. Now they're calling me a monster because I'm taking their house. Because I spent 7 years becoming the person who could actually do it. Because I turned their greatest mistake into their worst nightmare. I recorded that party for a reason. Kept that video for a reason. Built this company for a reason. And now I'm trying to figure out the next move because they're panicking and desperate, and I'm the only one who can stop what's coming. But I don't know if I want to. You asked for an update, and honestly, I've been reading comments when I should be sleeping. Some called me ruthless. Some said I should forgive them. Many wanted to know what happened when I finally talked to them. Here's where things stand now. And it's gotten far more complicated than just the house. I let them worry for 3 days. Didn't return calls, didn't respond to texts, nothing. Just worked, came home, lived my normal life while my phone kept lighting up with their panic. On the 4th day, Dad showed up at my apartment. Thursday afternoon around 2. I work from home most days doing software consulting, so I was there when he knocked. I opened the door and David looked like he'd aged a decade in a week. He started talking before I could say anything. We needed to discuss this situation. There must be some misunderstanding. Surely I didn't actually intend to foreclose on my own parents. He kept saying surely like it would change something. I let him in, made him stand in my living room. Didn't offer a seat or drink. He asked how this was even possible. How did I end up owning their mortgage? When did this happen? So I told him. Walked him through the whole thing. How I started learning about real estate investment at 23. How I built the company while he was telling relatives I was wasting my life. How I tracked every refinance they did, waited for the right moment, positioned myself to buy the note when it went up for sale. He tried interrupting about 5 times, but I kept talking over him. Told him about the property investment courses I took online, the legal consultations I paid for, the network I built with investors and mortgage brokers. Explained how I'd been covering their payments remotely for 2 years through the management company, keeping them afloat without their knowledge, and how I stopped doing that in January specifically to let them fall behind. David's face went through 15 different expressions: shock, confusion, anger, disbelief. He said this wasn't legal. I must have done something illegal. I pulled up the documents on my laptop right there and showed him every transaction, every transfer, every legal entity involved. All legitimate, all proper, all designed over 7 years specifically to put me in this exact position. Then he switched tactics, started talking about being my father, how they raised me, fed me, clothed me, paid for my education. I reminded him I dropped out of community college and he called me a quitter for years afterward. He said that was just tough love. Parents push their kids to be better. I asked if throwing a funeral party for my 30th birthday was also tough love. He actually laughed. Said it was just a joke. Everyone knew it wasn't serious. I was being too sensitive about something that happened 7 years ago. I pulled out my phone and played the recording. Stood there in my living room and made him listen to himself saying I was their greatest mistake. Made him listen to Patricia saying she wished she'd aborted me. Made him listen to Michelle calling me a pathetic waste of space while 30 people cheered. David went quiet. Told me to turn it off. I didn't. Let the whole 12 minutes play. When it finished, he said I recorded them without permission, which is illegal. I told him we're in a one-party consent state and I can record anything I'm present for. Also told him I've had an attorney review the recording and confirm I could use it in court if needed. That's when he started yelling. Said I was destroying the family over hurt feelings, being petty and vindictive, that this was financial abuse. I asked him what he called standing outside his house listening to his family celebrate his worthlessness. He said that was different. That was just words. This was actually ruining their lives. We went back and forth like this for 40 minutes. He tried everything. Guilt trips about family loyalty, accusations that I was mentally unstable, threats about getting attorneys involved, appeals to my sense of decency. I just kept bringing it back to the funeral party, to the years of comparison, with Michelle, to every time they told relatives I was an embarrassment. David finally admitted they'd been wrong about the party, said it went too far, that Patricia had been drinking and got carried away with the theme, that Michelle was just trying to be funny and didn't mean it seriously. He said if I wanted an apology, fine, they were sorry. Now could we please work something out about the house? I told him an apology 7 years late because you're about to lose your house isn't actually an apology. It's just panic. He asked what I wanted then. What would it take for me to stop the foreclosure? I said I didn't know yet. That I needed to think about it. That he should leave. He refused. Planted himself on my couch, said he wasn't going anywhere until we figured this out. Told me Patricia was at home crying, that this stress was making her sick, that they'd already talked to Michelle about maybe moving in with her, but she only has a 1-bedroom apartment. Said I was going to make my parents homeless over a party. I asked him why he thought their housing was my responsibility. He said, because I'm their son. I said he'd spent 30 years making it clear that being his son wasn't worth much. He said that wasn't fair, that every parent criticizes their kids sometimes, that I was taking normal family dynamics and turning them into some kind of revenge plot. That word, revenge. Like what I did was somehow worse than what they'd done for 30 years. I told David this wasn't revenge. This was consequences. He'd made bad financial decisions, refinanced the house multiple times, gotten behind on payments. All I did was buy the debt when it came up for sale and enforce the terms. Everything legal, everything legitimate. He called me a monster, said the son he raised wouldn't do this. I reminded him the son he raised was apparently his greatest mistake, so maybe he should be glad I turned out different. He got up and walked out, slammed my apartment door so hard something fell off the wall in the hallway. 2 hours later, Michelle showed up, my sister who told a room full of people I don't exist to her. She knocked, and when I opened the door, she pushed her way in without asking. Started talking immediately about how I was tearing apart the family, how mom and dad were devastated, how this was all because I couldn't take a joke. I played her the recording too, made her listen to her own voice calling me pathetic. She said she was 23 then, that people say things they don't mean, that she'd apologized to me before for being difficult when we were younger. I asked when she apologized. She couldn't give a specific time. Said it was implied. That, of course, she didn't actually think I was a waste of space, that siblings talk trash about each other all the time. I told her she didn't talk trash. She gave a speech at my funeral party. She literally toasted to my failure in front of extended family. Michelle said I was being dramatic, that everyone there knew it was all in good fun, that nobody actually thought those things. I asked her why she tells her friends I don't exist if it's all in good fun. She went quiet for a minute, then told me she only said that once in college because her roommate was asking nosy questions and she didn't want to explain our complicated family dynamic. I asked if she still tells people I don't exist. She said no, but her face said maybe. Michelle tried a different approach. Said she understood I was hurt, that the party was mean, that she could see why I was angry, but taking their house was extreme, was cruel, was going to destroy mom and dad's retirement and their future. She said they'd lose everything they'd worked for over 30 years. I pointed out I'd worked for 7 years to make this happen, so apparently I'm capable of long-term planning despite being a pathetic waste of space. She got angry then, really angry. Started yelling about how I'd tricked them, how I'd hidden what I was doing, how if they'd known I was buying their mortgage, they would have stopped it. I asked her how they would have stopped a legal business transaction. She didn't have an answer. Just kept saying it wasn't right, it wasn't fair. Family doesn't do this to family. I asked where that principle was 7 years ago when she was designing tombstone invitations. With my face on them, she said she was young and stupid. I said she was 23, which is apparently old enough to get a corporate job and be called successful, but not old enough to be held responsible for publicly humiliating her brother. We argued for over an hour. She tried guilt, anger, bargaining, more guilt. Told me I was going to regret this, that I'd end up alone with no family because of my pride. I told her I'd been functionally alone with no family for most of my life, so this wasn't much of a threat. She called me bitter and twisted. I asked if she expected me to be cheerful and forgiving. Before she left, Michelle told me that Mom was planning to come talk to me herself, that I should at least hear her out. Said Patricia was the most upset about all this, that she'd been crying every day since they got the foreclosure notice. Told Michelle I'd been upset for 30 years and nobody seemed to care much about that. She said that was different because I was always so quiet about it. How were they supposed to know I was actually hurt? I let that sit in the air for a minute. How was I supposed to tell them I was hurt when they were throwing parties to celebrate how much of a disappointment I was? Michelle didn't have an answer for that either. She left. Mom hasn't shown up yet, but she's been texting. Long messages about how she never meant any of those things. How parents say things they don't mean when they're frustrated. How she's always loved me, even if she didn't show it well. She sent me old photos of us when I was little. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations. Like that was supposed to erase 30 years of being compared unfavorably to Michelle. Patricia's latest text said she knows I'm hurt. But there are better ways to handle this than destroying their financial security. She suggested family therapy, said we could work through this with a professional, that she'd do anything to fix our relationship if I just stopped the foreclosure. I haven't responded. Meanwhile, the 30-day notice is still active. Foreclosure proceedings are moving forward unless they pay the full balance, which they can't. David called my phone 17 times yesterday. I finally blocked his number. Michelle's been texting from Patricia's phone trying to get me to respond. Some relatives have started calling too. People from the funeral party asking what's going on, if there's anything they can do to help fix this family crisis. None of them apologized. Not one person who was at that party and laughed at those toasts has said they were wrong. They're all focused on fixing things now, on moving forward, on saving the house. Nobody wants to talk about what led to this. They just want me to make it go away so everything can go back to normal. But I don't want normal. Normal was them treating me like I was worthless while I built something they couldn't even understand. Normal was being uninvited from family dinners and being glad I didn't show up. Normal was being the mistake, the disappointment, the embarrassment. I'm starting to realize this isn't just about the house anymore. This has cracked open something bigger. David and Patricia are panicking because their financial security is gone. Michelle's upset because she might have to deal with them moving in or asking her for money. The extended family is getting involved and taking sides, and I'm sitting here with all the power, watching them scramble and trying to figure out what I actually want from this. What happened next surprised even me. Mom finally showed up on Saturday morning at 7. Patricia looked devastated. No makeup, sweatpants, puffy eyes. She asked if we could talk. I let her in, same as I did with David. Didn't offer her anything. She sat on my couch without being invited and immediately started crying. Full sobbing. Told me she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, that the stress was making her physically ill. That she kept thinking about losing the house, about where they'd go, about how humiliating it would be to tell friends they were being foreclosed on by their own son. I waited for her to finish. She went on for 10 minutes about the house, their finances, their retirement plans falling apart. Then she switched to talking about me as a baby. As a little kid, how proud they were when I was born. How David used to carry me around showing me off to neighbors. How I was such a sweet child. She said she didn't know where things went wrong between us. When I became so angry and distant, I asked her if she genuinely didn't know, or if she was pretending not to know. She said she knew I was upset about the party, that it was wrong, that she'd had too much to drink that night and said things she didn't mean. I told her the party was 7 years ago and she'd had 7 years to apologize before I owned her mortgage. She said she didn't think I was that hurt by it, that I never said anything, that I just stopped coming around and she thought I was busy with my life. That stopped me for a second because the logic was so backwards it almost made me laugh. I stopped coming around after they threw me a funeral party and she thought that meant I wasn't hurt. Patricia said I'd always been so independent, so self-sufficient that she assumed I was fine, that I never needed them the way Michelle did. So they focused more on Michelle because she was needier. I asked her about all the years before the party, the comparisons, the criticism, the constant message that I was disappointing them. She said every parent wants their kids to reach their potential, that they were just trying to motivate me. I asked if calling me their greatest mistake was motivational. She said that was just David being dramatic, that he says things he doesn't mean when he's frustrated. We went in circles like this for an hour. She'd apologize for specific things, then immediately justify them or minimize them. She said the funeral party was Michelle's idea, and she just went along with it because Michelle was excited about the theme. Said the tombstone invitations were meant to be funny, like a roast. Said she didn't realize I was standing outside recording, which felt like the weirdest thing to focus on. Asked Patricia why she thought I spent 7 years building a company and positioning myself to buy their mortgage if I was fine and unbothered. She said she didn't know I'd done that it felt like a betrayal, that families don't keep secrets like this from each other. I reminded her about the funeral party they threw without inviting me. She said that was different because it was just one night, whereas I'd been plotting this for years. The word plotting, like I was some villain instead of someone who worked hard and made smart investments. I told her I wasn't plotting. I was building a legitimate business while they were telling everyone I was a failure. She said they never called me a failure to my face. I played her the recording again. Her own voice saying she wished she'd aborted the loser. Patricia cried harder. Said hearing herself say that made her sick, that she couldn't believe those words came out of her mouth, that she'd been drunk and angry and stupid. I asked her what she was angry about that night. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said they'd just gotten the third refinance notice on the house that week. Money was tight, and seeing me still struggling at 30 made her frustrated. That was the first honest thing she'd said. She wasn't angry at a party. She was angry because I reminded her of their financial failures. Because if I'd been successful like Michelle, maybe they could have asked me for money. Maybe I could have helped them instead of being another problem. I asked her if that's what this was about. If I was only valuable to them, if I could be useful. She denied it. Said that wasn't what she meant, but her face told a different story. We sat in silence for a while. Then Patricia asked what it would take for me to stop the foreclosure. Not asked if I would stop it, but what it would take, like we were negotiating a business deal. And that's when something shifted in me. I looked at this woman who'd raised me, who'd celebrated my supposed funeral, who'd said she wished she'd aborted me, and I realized something. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a transaction. She wanted to know what I wanted in exchange for making this go away. But I didn't want anything from them anymore. Not their house. Not their groveling. Not even their genuine apology, because I realize now that they weren't capable of giving one. They could only apologize when the consequences came for them, which meant it wasn't really an apology at all. I told Patricia to leave. She begged me to give her something. Any kind of answer about what I wanted or what I was planning. I said I'd let them know before the 30 days were up. She asked if I was really going to make them homeless. Asked if she really thought aborting me would have been better. She left over the next week. I did something I hadn't done in 7 years. I thought about what I actually wanted. Not what I wanted from them, what I wanted for myself. The funeral party had hurt me deeply. The years of comparison and criticism had wounded me, but I realized that taking their house wouldn't heal those wounds. It would just create new ones, different ones, but wounds nonetheless. I'd spent 7 years building something to prove them wrong, to show them I wasn't a failure, to have power over them, and I'd succeeded. The business was real. The success was real. The power was real. But revenge, I realized, was just another way of staying connected to people who'd hurt you. It was letting them control your life from a different angle. 3 days before the 30-day deadline, I made my decision. I called the management company and gave them instructions. Then I called a lawyer and had them draw up specific documents. Then I called my family. I told them I was selling the mortgage note back to a traditional bank, one that would work with them on a payment plan, restructure their debt, give them options. They wouldn't lose the house, but they'd have to work with the new lender and prove they could make payments. I told them I was doing this not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to move on with my life. Because holding power over them was just another form of being trapped by them. David asked if this meant we could rebuild our relationship. I said no. I told them all. David, Patricia, Michelle, that I was done. Not done in an angry way, but done in a peaceful way. I didn't want revenge anymore, but I also didn't want a relationship with people who saw me the way they did. I told them I'd be changing my phone number, that they could contact me through my lawyer if there were legal necessities. But otherwise, I was removing myself from their lives completely. Michelle called me cold. Patricia said I was being cruel. David said family is family. I reminded them of the funeral party one last time. Then I hung up. That was 3 months ago. I changed my number, moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city, focused on my business, which has continued to grow. I've made real friendships with people who value me for who I am, not who they wish I'd been. Sometimes I think about that funeral party, about standing outside in the cold, recording my own family celebrating my worthlessness. But now when I think about it, I don't feel the same rage I used to feel. I feel sad for them. Sad that they're people who could do that to their own child. And I feel sad for the version of me who stood outside that window, believing on some level that maybe they were right. But mostly I feel free. I built something to prove them wrong. And in the process, I proved something to myself, that I was capable, intelligent, and worthy, not because of what they thought. But despite it, the greatest revenge I learned wasn't taking their house. It was building a life where their opinion of me didn't matter anymore, where I could walk away with my head high and my conscience clear, knowing I'd given them more mercy than they'd ever given me. I don't know if they learned anything from this. Honestly, I don't think they did. From what I've heard through distant relatives, they tell people I had a mental breakdown and turned against the family for no reason. They've made themselves the victims in this story, and you know what? I'm okay with that, because I know the truth. I know what I built. I know what I survived. And I know that the best revenge isn't making them suffer. It's living well without them. That funeral party 7 years ago was meant to celebrate my failure. Instead, it became the catalyst for my success. They wanted to bury me. They didn't realize I was planting seeds.